show of hands, who here has not heard of the Me Too movement? Exactly. I think it's fair to say, and we can all agree, that gender equality and women's empowerment has dominated the cultural conversation over the last few years. Whether it's the Women's March of 2017, the Me Too movement, or the proliferation of the feminist t-shirt. Gender equality and these critical conversations are happening everywhere. So given this, wouldn't it be fair to assume that the gender gap is shrinking? That women are accessing more leadership roles? That girls have the same opportunity for education as boys, right? Well, not exactly. In fact, gender inequality remains the norm in every community, in every city, and in every country in the world. Believe it or not, the gender gap is actually widening. Think about that for a moment. A few years ago, experts looked at how long it would take to eliminate gender equality from this earth, and they predicted it would take about 80 years. Last year, they looked at that and determined it would take over 100. Despite a century of fighting for gender equality, clearly something is not working. Well, how do we know that? In North America, less than 5% of S&P 500 companies are led by female CEOs. Here in Canada, on the Toronto Stock Exchange, of the top 60 companies, there's not a single female CEO. And of those same companies, 2/3 of them don't even have a high woman earner among them. Here in Canada, we also know that 50% of sexual assaults are committed against young girls 15 to 24, and globally, 130 million girls have been sexually assaulted. Another 120 million girls never get to step foot in a classroom simply because they are female. And every 2 seconds, another girl is forced into child marriage. That's 12 million a year. Despite women representing 50% of the population, only 6% of heads of state are female. And this is a shocker. There are still 104 countries around the world that prevent women from holding certain jobs. The gender gap is widening. So what are we to do? Well, I'm going to answer that question. Something is not working, and we have to ask ourselves what. So what is it that's not working? I'm going to answer that question, and it might be surprising because the answer is probably not something you've heard before, but it's this. The march for gender equality is being held back because there are not enough men invested in its success. What do you think about when you think of the fight for gender equality? Probably images like this. This is the Women's March of 2017. It is the largest single-day protest in American history. I look at this and I'm inspired by what I see. But I also have a question for us all. Where are the men? Where are the men? Imagine if, in addition to millions of women pouring into the streets, there were millions of men standing shoulder to shoulder with women, demanding equality, demanding equal pay, demanding sexual and health rights, demanding an end to harassment, to sexual assault, to domestic violence, demanding an end to harmful social norms. What if in a classroom, boys didn't just learn about the basics of sex ed, but they learned about intimacy? What if we were in Uganda with a group of 12-year-old boys, and instead of just learning about menstruation, they learned how to make menstrual hygiene pads so girls didn't have to miss a week of school every month? Imagine if men taught young boys why catcalling is wrong and that women deserve to be treated with respect. But that's not what we think of when we think of the March for Gender Equality. Instead, what we think of is women shattering glass ceilings and girls and women breaking down barriers and girls and women leaning in. And don't get me wrong, all of that is important, but it's not enough. In fact, even when Michelle Obama was asked if women should be leaning in more, her response was simple. Sometimes that shit doesn't work. I am CEO of an organization called Plan International. We champion children's rights and equality for girls, and I have had the chance over the last 20 years to travel all over the world and meet thousands of incredible women and girls. But I can tell you this, putting the fight for gender equality on their shoulders alone is not fair. It's not fair, and it's not working. But what does work? It's when girls and boys go and petition their parliament to put an end to child marriage. It's that program that I told you about in Uganda. That is a real program where boys learn how to make sanitary pads. And what we've seen is girls no longer have to miss school and fall behind. So is that program where men who once sexually harassed women talk to other men about why that's not acceptable anymore. And so, in a world where the gender gap is widening, even in the face of the Me Too movement, what are we to do? Well, I'm going to give you 3 evidence-based, proven solutions from around the globe that I hope you walk away today and action in your own lives. First, it's for the women. Women, we need to insist that men are at the table. The reality is that so many tables of power are still dominated by men. But when it comes to the discussions about gender equality, the men seem to be missing. I can't tell you the number of times I've been invited to speak on the issue of gender equality, and there's no men on the panel, and there's no men in the audience. The reality is this: no revolution in history has succeeded without inviting people with power to be champions in the fight for gender equality. Let me tell you this. My organization was working in Uganda and in Peru. In Uganda and Peru, it can be very unsafe for women to take public transportation. And what that means is they often stay at home and don't participate in society. They're at risk of sexual harassment and, at worst, sexual abuse. So we worked with the women to develop an app that showed them the safest routes to take: taxi routes, bus routes. And that was a great start, but we didn't stop there. We insisted that men be at the table. We met with politicians, with the taxi drivers, with the motorcycle drivers, and we helped them understand the impact of their behavior on women and girls. And not only were the results transformational, they actually changed much of their misogynistic behavior, but it actually transformed the entire system. Many of the taxi drivers and bus drivers actually started changing their routes to take the routes that were safest for women and girls. But here's the thing. If women are insisting that men are at the table, it brings me to my second point, which is this. Men, it's time for you to lean in. Women have been leaning in for centuries. We can't lean in anymore. But we need men not to just lean in as advocates or as allies, but truly as fellow champions in the fight for gender equality with us. But here's the thing. Men are actually leaning back. We've heard across industries in the wake of the Me Too movement, men are now afraid to sponsor and to mentor and even to work closely with some women. And if we're not careful, the gap in the workplace will become a chasm, because we know that people who are sponsored or mentored are 23% more likely to advance in their career. So going back to the example from Uganda and Peru, we asked men to lean in, and the results were incredible. I heard from a taxi driver who said to me firsthand, "I want to create the safest city in the world for girls when my son grows up, because I've realized that it's not just good for girls, it's good for my son too." And we saw taxi drivers actually create these new vests that said, "A girl's safety is my safety." These are the kind of changes that can happen when men lean in. And third, and probably most importantly, is we have to start communicating the fact that the fight for gender equality is not a zero-sum game. It is an absolute win-win game. There's no secrets that advancing women and girls have benefit for everyone. In fact, societies that are more gender equal are more stable, they're safer, they're more economically prosperous, and its citizens are actually healthier, happier, and better educated. But let me make a much more personal argument for you, and it's this. I'm the mother of a 10-year-old son, and just as much as I want his female classmates to fight for gender equality, I want him to be part of that fight too, because I know this. Gender inequality is harmful to my son. The reality is harmful gender norms are a prison for both men and women. It's just that we don't talk about it when it comes to men. But here's the data. Did you know that many of the health issues that men face are actually linked back to harmful masculine norms? Things like aggression, violence, lack of self-care, and acting macho. And in fact, substance abuse, drug use, alcohol use, tobacco use, unsafe sex, occupational hazards, recreational hazards, these account for 50% of male deaths and 70% of male morbidity globally. These are also the same behaviors that are often linked to masculine norms. And so we need to change this because gender equality is a win-win game for everyone. We've also seen from the research that when men are more engaged in caring for their children and being at home, that actually they are healthier and happier. Gender equality is truly a win-win game. But in order for us all to win, we all have to play the game. We can't win if half of the team at any given point is sitting on the sidelines. And the reality is this: we know today what it can take to create a more gender equal world, where men and women, boys and girls can have power with each other instead of power over each other. But you know what we need to do? We need to all show up for the march. Let me close with saying this. I cannot and will not wait another 100 years to achieve gender equality and to benefit from gender equality. And if there's one thing you remember today, it's this: you don't have to wait another 100 years either. Thank you.